A Hell's Angel finds his only daughter, crying at his son's grave. The truth shocked everyone. The rumble of Cal Mercer's motorcycle echoed through the empty cemetery, cutting through the still night air. His headlights swept across rows of weathered headstones as he guided his bike down the narrow gravel path. Something had pulled him here tonight, a nagging feeling he couldn't shake, like an itch under his skin. The cemetery was different after dark. Shadows stretched long and deep between the markers, and a single street lamp cast an unsteady glow near the newer plots. As Cal killed his engine, that flickering light caught his attention. Someone was there, hunched over by his son's grave. His boots crunched on the gravel as he dismounted, leather jacket creaking as he straightened. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but as he moved closer, his heart clenched. It was Lena, his daughter, kneeling in the damp grass before Eli's headstone. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. One hand traced the carved letters of Eli's name, while the other pressed against her middle, as if holding herself together. She hadn't heard him approach. Cal stood frozen, watching her break down. In all his years as club president, he'd seen plenty of grieving women, wives and mothers of fallen brothers, but watching his own daughter mourn hit different. It reached past his hardened exterior and grabbed something deep in his chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the stone. "I'm so sorry, Eli." The words carried on the night breeze, heavy with guilt that Cal didn't understand. Sure, there had been tension before Eli's death, his son's sudden defiance of club orders, his determination to protect Lena from that arranged marriage. But why would she blame herself? The lamp above them sputtered, making shadows dance across the grave. Lena's fingers dug into the grass, her knuckles white with strain. Even from where he stood, Cal could see she was trembling. He'd never been good at comfort. Violence, intimidation, control, those were the tools he knew. But seeing his little girl like this stirred something else in him. Something that had been buried under years of club loyalty and brutal necessity. A twig snapped under his boot as he shifted his weight. Lena's head jerked up, her whole body going rigid with fear. She clutched the headstone like it was a shield, pressing herself against the cold marble. "Lena." Cal spoke her name softly, stepping out of the shadows. Cal's knees creaked as he lowered himself beside Lena in the damp grass. The flickering lamplight cast strange shadows across her tear-streaked face. She looked so young in that moment, reminding him of the little girl who used to run to him with scraped knees and broken toys. But he couldn't fix this with a bandage or stern word. "Baby girl," he said, his gruff voice softened by concern. "It's late. You shouldn't be out here alone." Lena wiped her cheeks with trembling hands, but wouldn't meet his eyes. "I needed to see him," she whispered, her fingers still tracing Eli's name on the cold stone. I needed to be close to him tonight." Cal understood grief. He'd buried enough brothers over the years to know how it could sneak up and grab you by the throat when you least expected it. But this seemed different. The way Lena's shoulders hunched, how she kept one arm wrapped protectively around her middle. It spoke of something deeper than simple mourning. "Is this about the arrangement?" he asked carefully. "Because that's done now. That crew won't bother you again." He didn't mention how Eli's defiance had led to his death, how his son's final act had been protecting his sister from a forced marriage meant to secure a dangerous alliance. A harsh sob escaped Lena's throat. "You don't understand," she choked out. "None of you ever understood." "Then help me understand," Cal said, fighting to keep the frustration from his voice. Patience had never been his strong suit, but he forced himself to remain still, to give her space to speak. The lamp above them buzzed and flickered, making Lena flinch. She pressed her forehead against the headstone, as if drawing strength from it. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't go home. Not tonight." "Lena, you're not thinking straight. It's not safe out here." "Safe?" She let out a broken laugh that scared him more than her tears. "This is the only place I feel safe anymore, Dad. Right here, with him." Cal reached for her shoulder, but she shrank away from his touch. The rejection stung more than he wanted to admit. "You've got nothing to be afraid of," he insisted. "The club protects its own. You know that." "Please," Lena begged, her voice cracking. "Just let me stay a little longer, please." Something in her tone made Cal's skin crawl. He'd heard plenty of desperate pleas in his time, from enemies begging for mercy, from brothers asking for help, but never from his own daughter. Never with this edge of raw fear. "At least let me take you somewhere else," he tried. "The church, maybe, or—" "No." Lena's fingers dug into the grass. "I need to be here. This is the only place." She trailed off, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. Cal watched helplessly as his daughter curled closer to his son's headstone, whispering words he couldn't make out. The street lamp cast her shadow long and dark across the grave, like a secret stretching between them. "This is the only place I'm safe," she repeated, so quietly he almost missed it. "Please, Dad, just go." Cal pushed himself to his feet, his weathered boots pressing into the soft earth. He'd spent decades leading men through danger, making hard calls that meant life or death. This shouldn't be any different. Sometimes being a father meant making unpopular decisions. "That's enough," he said, his voice taking on the firm edge that made prospect members snap to attention. "I'm not leaving you out here alone. You're coming home." Lena's fingers tightened around the headstone. "Dad, please!" No arguments. Cal took a step closer, looming over her in the flickering lamplight. "I've given you space. I've tried to be patient. But this isn't healthy, Lena. Eli wouldn't want you destroying yourself like this." A strange sound escaped her throat. Something between a laugh and a sob. "You don't know what Eli would want." "I was his father." The words came out sharper than he intended. "Were you?" Lena finally looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears and something else, something that looked almost like defiance. "When was the last time you really knew him, Dad? The real him?" The question hit Cal like a physical blow. He remembered Eli as a boy, eager to please, following him around the garage with a tiny toy wrench. Then later, grown but distant, going through the motions of club life with a quiet resignation that Cal had never quite understood. "I knew my son," Cal insisted, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "No." Lena shook her head slowly. "You knew what you wanted to see, what the club wanted to see. But Eli—" Her voice caught. "Eli was so much more than that." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Cal glanced at the gathering clouds. "We need to go. Now!" He reached for her arm. Lena jerked away from his touch, scrambling to her feet. "Don't!" The force of her reaction startled them both. "Damn it, Lena!" Cal's patience finally snapped. "I'm trying to protect you." "Protect me?" She laughed again, that same broken sound that made his skin crawl. "Like you protected Eli? That's not fair." Cal felt his hands curl into fists. "I didn't want what happened to him. If I'd known what he was planning—" "You'd have what?" Lena challenged. "Stopped him? Forced him to stay? Made him be the good soldier you always wanted?" "I'd have saved his life," Cal roared. The words echoed through the cemetery, startling a nest of birds into flight. In the sudden silence that followed, Lena's next words fell like stones into still water. "You can't save someone who isn't dead." Cal's mind stuttered to a halt. What? Lena wrapped her arms around herself, as if physically holding in the truth that was fighting to escape. But now that she'd started, the words came rushing out. Eli isn't dead, she whispered. He never was. Cal stood frozen, his world tilting on its axis. The gravestone behind Lena suddenly seemed to mock him, its carved letters spelling out a lie he'd believed for over a year. The thunder growled closer, but Cal barely heard it. All he could hear was his daughter's impossible words echoing in his head. Eli isn't dead. He never was. The lamplight cast strange shadows across Lena's face as she hugged herself tighter. Rain started to fall, gentle drops that caught the light like tears. Remember Dr. Matthews? Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. The one who pronounced Eli dead after the crash. Cal nodded slowly. He remembered everything about that night. The phone call, the rush to the hospital, the doctor's grim face as he delivered the news. He owed Eli a favor, a big one. Lena's words came faster now, like she couldn't hold them back anymore. 2 years ago, Eli saved the doctor's daughter from an overdose, got her into rehab, kept it quiet. Dr. Matthews never forgot that. Cal's mind raced, connecting dots he'd never seen before. The body was from the morgue, someone unclaimed. Lena wiped rain from her face, or maybe they were tears. The crash was staged. The Savage Sons helped. They'd been wanting to break away from the Alliance for months. They made sure the bike burned enough that... She trailed off, swallowing hard. That we couldn't identify the body, Cal finished. His legs felt weak. He remembered standing in the morgue, looking down at what remained, believing with all his heart he was seeing his son. Eli knew what would happen when he leaked information about the arranged marriage to the feds, Lena continued. He knew the club would kill him for betraying them. This way, she gestured helplessly. This way he could save me and survive. Just somewhere else, as someone else. Cal thought about the marriage arrangement, a political alliance with a rival club that would have handed his daughter over like property. He'd told himself it was for her protection, for the good of the club. Now shame burned in his throat. He got word to me the night before, Lena said. Told me not to worry when I heard about the crash, that he'd found a way to fix everything. She laughed softly, but it held no humor. I had to pretend, Dad. At the funeral, at the wake, I had to act like I believed he was gone, when all I wanted to do was tell you he was safe. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the headstone. Cal stared at the carved letters of his son's name, remembering how many times he'd stood here, talking to what he thought was Eli's spirit. All those conversations, all that grief. Where? The word came out rough, choked. I can't tell you that. Lena's voice held steel now. Please don't ask me to. He's safe. He's happy, even. As happy as he can be, living with what he had to do. Cal's legs finally gave out. He sank onto a nearby bench, the wet wood soaking through his jeans. His son was alive. The thought kept repeating in his head, each time bringing a new wave of emotion, shock, confusion, anger at the deception, but underneath it all, a profound relief that made his hands shake. Eli was alive. His boy hadn't died in violence after all, hadn't ended up another casualty of the life Cal had chosen for them all. He looked up at Lena, seeing for the first time how the weight of this secret had aged her. She stood watching him anxiously, rain plastering her hair to her face, waiting for his reaction. Cal knew he should feel betrayed, should feel rage at being fooled, at having his authority as both father and club leader undermined. But all he felt was a lightness in his chest, like something frozen was finally starting to thaw. His son was alive. The rain eased to a drizzle as Lena wrapped her arms around herself, looking smaller than Cal remembered. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, like she used to do as a little girl when she had something difficult to say. "There's more," she whispered, her voice trembling. "About Eli and me." Cal waited, watching his daughter struggle with words that seemed stuck in her throat. The cemetery was silent, except for water dripping from the trees. "We grew up apart after Mom died," Lena started. "You sent me to Aunt Sarah's, remember? Said it wasn't right for a girl to be raised in the clubhouse." She smiled sadly. But every summer, every holiday, Eli would visit. He was different there, away from all this. Gentler. More himself. Cal remembered those visits. He'd thought they were just siblings staying close, keeping what little family they had intact. As we got older, something changed. Lena's fingers twisted in the hem of her jacket. "We weren't just brother and sister anymore. We were..." She took a shaky breath. "We fell in love." The words hung in the damp air between them. Cal felt his world tilt sideways, everything he thought he knew about his children rearranging itself. "It wasn't wrong," Lena said quickly, seeing his expression. "We didn't grow up together, not really. We were more like..." She searched for words. "Like two people who found each other after being alone for so long, who understood each other's scars." Cal remembered how fiercely Eli had fought against the arranged marriage, how he'd risked everything to stop it. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. "When you announced the marriage alliance," Lena continued, "Eli couldn't bear it. He said he'd rather die than see me forced into that life. That's when we started planning." She described late-night meetings, whispered conversations in safe places, how they'd found allies in unexpected corners, the doctor who owed Eli, the rival club members who wanted out of the alliance. "The night before the crash, we met one last time." Lena's voice softened with the memory. "Eli promised he'd find a way for us to be together. Somewhere far from all this. Somewhere safe." Cal thought about his son, living under a false name, watching from a distance as the woman he loved visited his own grave. The sacrifice of it struck him deep in his chest. "He's been so careful, Dad. Changed his appearance, his voice, everything about himself. Nobody would recognize him now." Lena's eyes pleaded for understanding. "He did it all to protect me, to give us a chance." The sky was beginning to lighten, the first hint of dawn touching the horizon. Cal stood, his joints stiff from sitting in the cold. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the little girl he'd tried to protect, but a woman who'd found love strong enough to defy everything she'd been taught to fear. He reached down and helped Lena to her feet. Her hand was cold in his, but her grip was strong. They stood together beside Eli's empty grave, father and daughter, while the truth of what she'd revealed settled between them like the morning dew. This changed everything. Every assumption, every plan, every certainty Cal had built his life around shifted beneath his feet like sand. His son wasn't dead. His children had found love in the shadow of violence. And now he had to decide what kind of father he would be in the face of it all. The gravel crunched under their feet as they walked toward Cal's truck parked at the cemetery gates. The first hints of sunrise painted the clouds in soft pinks and purples, but the air still held the chill of night. Lena's footsteps suddenly slowed, then stopped completely. "Dad, wait." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "There's something else you need to know." Cal turned to face his daughter. In the growing light, he could see how pale she looked, how her hands shook as she hugged herself. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. "What is it, baby?" The old endearment slipped out before he could catch it. A reminder of simpler times when he could fix her problems with a Band-Aid and a kiss on the forehead. Lena's eyes welled with fresh tears. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, struggling to find the words. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. "Hey now, breathe." Cal stepped closer, placing his weathered hands on her shoulders. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out." She shook her head, a sob catching in her throat. "You don't understand. This changes everything. The club, if they ever found out." A car passed on the distant highway, its headlights sweeping across the cemetery gates. Lena flinched at the light, her fear visible in every tense line of her body. "Look at me," Cal said softly, ducking his head to meet her eyes. "Nothing you say right now leaves this place. Whatever it is, it stays between us." Lena took a deep, shuddering breath. She pressed one hand against her stomach, a gesture so quick and unconscious that Cal almost missed it. Almost? His heart stopped. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, confirming his sudden understanding. "It's Eli's baby." The words hung in the pre-dawn air like smoke. Cal's hands dropped from her shoulders as he took a step back, the weight of this new revelation hitting him like a physical blow. His mind raced through the implications, the danger, the complications, the absolute impossibility of keeping this secret in their world. Lena stood before him, trembling but straight-backed, one hand still protectively curved over her stomach. In that moment, she looked so much like her mother that it made Cal's chest ache. "How?" he started, then shook his head. "How far along?" 3 months, Lena said, her voice steadying slightly. "I found out just before I started visiting the grave more often. I needed to feel close to him somehow." Cal ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough scratch of his beard against his palm. His grandson, or granddaughter, was growing inside his daughter, a new life created from a love that could get them all killed if the wrong people ever discovered the truth. "Does Eli know?" he asked. Lena shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I haven't found a safe way to tell him yet. I've been trying, but—" She swayed slightly on her feet, exhaustion and emotion finally catching up with her. Cal stepped forward and caught her in his arms, holding her like he hadn't done since she was small. She pressed her face into his leather jacket and sobbed. Cal's old pickup truck rumbled down the empty streets as dawn crept over the horizon. The dashboard clock showed 5:47 a.m., its red numbers glowing in the dim cabin. Lena sat pressed against the passenger door, her forehead resting against the cool glass, watching houses slide past in a blur. Neither of them had spoken since leaving the cemetery. The radio stayed off, leaving only the engine's steady growl and the whisper of tires on asphalt to fill the heavy silence. Cal's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched tight as his mind churned through everything he'd learned. A baby, his grandchild. The thought kept hitting him like waves against rocks, each time carrying new implications, new dangers. He glanced at Lena, noting how one hand remained protectively curved over her stomach, even in sleep-deprived exhaustion. They stopped at a red light, though no other cars were around at this early hour. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, catching in the rearview mirror and making Cal squint. Beside him, Lena shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "You need to see a doctor," Cal said, breaking the silence. His voice sounded rough, even to his own ears. "A real one, not just some back alley clinic." Lena turned to look at him, shadows under her eyes stark in the morning light. "I can't use my real name. The club has eyes everywhere. Hospitals, clinics, pharmacies." "I know people," Cal replied, easing the truck forward as the light changed. "Good people, outside the life. They can help without asking questions." "Like the doctor who helped fake Eli's death?" Lena's words carried a hint of bitter humor. Cal nodded slowly. Similar. But this time it's about bringing life into the world, not hiding it. They turned onto their street, lined with modest houses showing early signs of life. Porch lights clicking off, newspapers being retrieved, cats slinking home from night prowls. Their own house sat dark and quiet at the end of the block, its weather-worn paint and overgrown lawn a testament to deeper neglect. As Cal pulled into the driveway, Lena's hand moved to the door handle, but she paused. "What are we going to do?" Her voice was small, almost childlike in its uncertainty. Cal switched off the engine, letting the sudden silence settle around them. The question hung between them, heavy with all its unspoken layers. What were they going to do about Eli, about the baby, about the club that would destroy them all if the truth ever came to light? "For now," Cal said carefully, "you're going to go inside and get some rest. Real rest, not just sitting at that window watching shadows." He turned to face her fully. "We'll figure out the rest, one step at a time." Lena nodded, though doubt clouded her eyes. She pushed open the truck door and slid out, her movements careful and measured. The gravel crunched under her feet as she walked toward the house, fumbling slightly with her keys at the front door. Cal watched from the truck as she disappeared inside. The morning sun now cleared the horizon completely, casting long shadows across the driveway. He could almost feel the weight of what was coming pressing down on his shoulders. Choices to make, lies to craft, a fragile new life to protect. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across Cal's worn wooden table. His coffee had gone cold, untouched in the chipped mug that Eli had given him years ago. The house creaked and settled around him, reminding him of its emptiness. Cal rubbed his weathered face with calloused hands, his mind replaying fragments of memories. Eli at 5 years old, determined to fix his own bicycle. At 12, proud and oil-stained after helping in the garage for the first time. At 16, receiving his first motorcycle, a beat-up Harley that father and son had restored together. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. His son was alive. The thought kept hitting him like a physical blow, making his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. He got up and paced to the counter, pouring out the cold coffee and starting a fresh pot. The familiar routine did nothing to settle his racing thoughts. The morning paper lay unopened on the counter, yesterday's mail scattered beside it. Normal life seemed absurd now. Cal's eyes drifted to the refrigerator, where a single photo hung by a magnet. It showed Eli at 18, standing next to his restored Harley, grinning with quiet pride. That same quiet strength had led him to risk everything to protect his sister, to walk away from the only life he'd known. The coffee maker sputtered and hissed, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. Cal leaned against the counter, his fingers drumming in restless pattern on the worn formica. Eli was out there somewhere, probably not more than an hour's ride away, living under a false name, working as a mechanic, using the skills Cal had taught him to build a new life. A car door slammed somewhere outside, making Cal tense instinctively. He moved to the window, checking the street with practiced caution. Just the neighbor leaving for work. But the paranoid habit reminded him of the danger. The club had eyes everywhere. They'd killed men for far less than what Eli had done. The coffee maker clicked off. Cal poured himself a fresh cup, but left it black this time, needing its bitter strength. He settled back at the table, his thoughts turning to Lena sleeping upstairs. She'd been carrying this secret for months, protecting both her brother and her unborn child. The weight of it showed in the shadows under her eyes, in the way she jumped at sudden noises. Cal's hands tightened around the warm mug. A year of grieving for a son who wasn't dead. A year of watching his daughter withdraw into herself, thinking he knew why. A year of club members offering gruff condolences while his son lived and breathed just miles away. The morning light had shifted, drawing new patterns on the table. Cal traced them with one finger, remembering how Eli used to do the same as a child, making up stories about the shapes. His son had always been the gentle one, more likely to fix things than break them. Cal had worried it made him weak. Now he wondered if it had made him the strongest of them all. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. The need to see Eli had been growing steadily since the cemetery, but now it became overwhelming. He needed to see his son's face, to know with his own eyes that Eli was really alive, to understand how his quiet, thoughtful boy had found the courage to sacrifice everything for love. Cal reached for his leather jacket, hanging by the door. He would find Eli today. No more waiting, no more questions. A father needed to see his son. The sun hung high in the afternoon sky as Cal's pickup truck rumbled down a potholed street on the outskirts of town. Industrial buildings lined both sides, their metal walls bleached by years of harsh weather. He'd changed into plain clothes, no club colors, nothing that would draw attention. Mason's Auto Repair came into view, its faded sign creaking in the wind. The place looked honest enough, if worn around the edges. 2 bays were open, showing glimpses of cars on lifts. A bell jingled as Cal pushed open the glass door, stepping into a small office that smelled of motor oil and coffee. An older woman sat behind the counter, working on a crossword puzzle. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up with a friendly smile. "Help you?" "Looking for Dave," Cal said, using the name Lena had given him. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his voice stayed steady. "Heard he's good with older engines." The woman nodded. "He's the best we've got, out back in Bay 3. She pointed toward a side door. "Go on through." Cal's boots echoed on the concrete floor as he walked through the shop. Country music played softly from a radio somewhere. 2 mechanics glanced up from their work, then returned to their tasks. Everything about the place was ordinary, unremarkable, a perfect hiding place. He rounded a corner and stopped. Bay 3 was at the end, flooded with sunlight from the open door. A man in gray coveralls stood at a workbench, his back turned as he sorted through tools. Even from behind, Cal recognized the set of those shoulders, the careful way he handled each wrench and socket. Eli, his son. Cal's throat tightened. He took another step forward, scuffing his boot deliberately against the floor. The sound carried in the cavernous space. The man at the workbench tensed slightly but didn't turn around, his hand stilled on the tools. "Can I help you?" The voice was familiar but careful, neutral. "Got an old Harley that needs work," Cal said quietly. "Heard you're the man to see." The tools clinked as Eli set them down, one by one. His movements were deliberate, controlled. He wiped his hands slowly on a shop rag, still facing the workbench. "What year?" Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 99 Softail. Cal took another step closer. "Same as the one we rebuilt together." The shop rag dropped from Eli's hands. Slowly, he turned around. Father and son faced each other across the oil-stained concrete. Eli looked thinner, his face more weathered than Cal remembered. A year's worth of worry had left its mark, but his eyes were clear and steady, meeting his father's gaze without flinching. For a long moment, neither man moved. The radio played softly in the background. A wrench clattered in a distant bay. Through the open door, traffic hummed on the street outside, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon that had suddenly become extraordinary. Cal saw his son's hands clench and unclench at his sides, saw the slight tremor in his shoulders, saw the mix of fear and hope and determination in his eyes. This was Eli, alive, breathing, standing right there in the sunlight. Their eyes locked, and a year's worth of grief and secrets hung in the space between them. Eli moved first, walking to the bay door and pulling it down with a metallic rattle. He flipped the sign on the office door to closed and drew the blinds. Only then did he turn back to his father, shoulders tight with tension. "There's a break room in the back," Eli said, his voice low. "More private." Cal followed his son through a narrow hallway, into a small room with a coffee maker, mini fridge, and worn table. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Eli gestured to one of the plastic chairs before taking a seat himself. "Doc Martinez helped," Eli began, his hands clasped on the table. "He owed me a favor after I fixed his daughter's car last winter. Got the death certificate signed, no questions asked." He paused, studying his father's face. "The body in the casket was from the morgue, someone unclaimed who matched my build." Cal's jaw tightened. "The bike crash?" "Staged. The lone wolves helped with that part." Eli's voice grew quieter. "Their president's sister, the one who escaped an arranged marriage 10 years ago? She understood what Lena was facing." Understanding dawned in Cal's eyes. The rival club's mysterious involvement suddenly made sense. That's why they backed off so quick after the crash. Eli nodded. They made it look real. Burned wreck, dental records switched. He ran a hand through his hair. "I knew the club would kill me anyway for what I did, exposing the trafficking connection. This way at least Lena would be safe." "But you stayed." It wasn't a question. "Couldn't leave her unprotected?" Eli's voice cracked slightly. "Got the job here 3 days after the funeral. Changed my name, kept my head down. The owner knows enough not to ask questions." He gestured around the break room. "It's not much, but I can see Lena's apartment from the garage roof. Make sure no one's watching her." Cal studied his son's face, thinner now, with shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. But there was strength there, too, and a quiet determination that reminded Cal of himself at that age. "The club." Eli hesitated. "They still watching her?" "Not as close as they used to." Cal's voice was gruff. "They think she's grieving. No threat anymore." He leaned forward. "But if they find out about this, about you, about the baby..." Eli's head snapped up, eyes wide. "Baby?" The word came out barely above a whisper. Cal saw the color drain from his son's face. "She told me last night, at your grave." Eli stood abruptly, pacing the small room. His hands were shaking. "A baby," he breathed. "Oh, God." He pressed his palms against the wall, head bowed. "I should have taken her further away. Should have. Son." Cal rose from his chair. Eli turned, and suddenly he looked very young, like the boy who used to run to his father with skinned knees and broken toys, believing Dad could fix anything. His eyes were wet. "I don't know how to protect them both," Eli whispered. Cal crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled his son into his arms. Eli stiffened for a moment, then melted into the embrace, his shoulders shaking. Cal held him tight, one hand on the back of his head like when he was small. Pride and fear warred in Cal's chest, pride in the man his son had become, fear for what lay ahead. He'd spent a year grieving this boy, and now here he was, alive and trembling in his arms, having sacrificed everything to save the woman he loved. The sun was setting when Cal's truck turned onto the narrow dirt road. Eli sat tensely in the passenger seat, his hands gripping his knees. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the auto shop, both lost in their own thoughts. The safe house came into view, a small cabin tucked behind a screen of pine trees, its weathered wood blending into the forest shadows. Cal had bought it years ago, under a false name, keeping it as a backup that even the club didn't know about. A blue sedan was already parked out front. "Lena's here?" Eli asked, his voice rough with emotion. Cal nodded, killing the engine. "Told her to come straight from work. No stops, no phones." They climbed out of the truck, gravel crunching under their boots. The evening air was cool and still, broken only by distant bird calls. Eli hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, his face a mix of longing and fear. "She needs to see you," Cal said quietly. The screen door creaked open before they could knock. Lena stood in the doorway, one hand pressed against her stomach. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lena made a small, broken sound and flew down the steps into Eli's arms. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest. "I wanted to tell you about the baby. I just didn't know how—" Eli held her tighter, burying his face in her hair. "Don't apologize, not ever." His voice shook. "I'm the one who's sorry. Leaving you alone like that?" Cal watched them from the bottom step, his throat tight. They looked so young, clinging to each other in the fading light, too young to carry such heavy secrets. Inside the cabin, they gathered around the small kitchen table. A single lamp cast warm light over their faces. Lena hadn't let go of Eli's hand since they sat down. "How far along?" Eli asked softly. 3 months. Lena's free hand rested on her still flat stomach. "Doctor says everything looks healthy." Cal leaned forward, his expression serious. "We need to be smart about this. The club can't suspect anything's changed." He looked at Lena. "You keep living your normal life, work, home, occasional visits to the cemetery?" She nodded, squeezing Eli's hand. "And you," Cal turned to his son, "stay at the shop. Keep your head down. No contact except through me, not until we figure something more permanent." "What about when she starts showing?" Eli's jaw was tight with worry. "I've thought about that," Lena said. "There's a women's shelter 2 towns over. I can say I'm volunteering there, helping other women escape bad situations." Her smile was sad. "No one would question why that matters to me." Cal nodded slowly. "Could work. Gives you a reason to be away sometimes, explains any baby stuff they might notice." "But the birth certificate," Eli started. "We'll handle that when it comes," Cal cut in. "Right now we focus on keeping you all safe while I work out the details." He looked between them. "No one else can know. Not about the baby, not about you being alive. The smallest slip could get back to the club." The young couple exchanged glances, then nodded. Outside, crickets had started their evening chorus. The lamplight caught the tears in Lena's eyes, but her voice was steady. "We trust you, Dad." Those words hit Cal like a physical blow. How long had it been since his children had looked at him with such faith? He reached across the table and took their joined hands in his. "I'm going to make this right," he promised. "Whatever it takes." The clubhouse parking lot was packed with motorcycles when Cal pulled in the next morning. He took his usual spot near the front, between 2 gleaming Harleys, and killed the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, letting the familiar rumble fade from his bones. 20 years of meetings in this place. The worn brick building had been like a second home. Now it felt like walking into a trap. Inside, cigarette smoke hung thick in the air. Brothers lounged on leather couches or leaned against the bar, their cuts decorated with patches that told stories of loyalty and violence. Cal nodded to a few as he made his way to the meeting room. "Iron Cal," someone called out. "You're looking tired, brother." "Late night," Cal answered without stopping. It wasn't even a lie. The meeting room was already half full. Cal took his regular chair near the head of the long table, careful to keep his face neutral. These men could read weakness like sharks smelling blood. Snake, The club president sat at the head of the table. His weathered face was creased in a permanent frown beneath his gray beard. He didn't look up from the papers in front of him as the rest filed in. "Let's get started," Snake said once everyone was seated. "First order of business. We got word the Diablos are moving product through our territory again." Cal listened as they discussed territories and revenge, adding his opinion when expected. But he could feel Snake watching him. The president's dark eyes kept drifting his way between topics. "What about your daughter, Cal?" Snake asked suddenly, cutting through a discussion about gun shipments. "How's she holding up?" The room got quieter. Cal met Snake's gaze steadily. "She's grieving. You know how it is." "Sure do." Snake nodded slowly. "Saw her car headed out of town yesterday, past the cemetery." "She volunteers at some women's shelter now," Cal said. "Keeps her busy." "Good to hear." Snake's voice was careful. "Long as she's not getting mixed up in anything complicated." The threat wasn't even hidden. Cal felt the weight of eyes around the table. "My daughter knows her place," he said firmly. "I made sure of that after what happened with the arranged marriage." Snake studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Course you did. Your family, Cal. We trust family." The meeting dragged on another hour. Cal felt the tension building in his shoulders as they went through club business. Every comment seemed to have a double meaning. Every glance held suspicion. When Snake finally called an end, he held up his hand before anyone could leave. "Oh yeah, one more thing. Cal, I'm putting Mickey on as your new right hand." Mickey, a young enforcer known for his brutality, grinned from across the table. Cal kept his expression neutral even as his stomach churned. This wasn't a promotion for Mickey. It was a watchdog being assigned. "Whatever you need, brother," Cal said. As the others filed out, Snake caught Cal's arm. "Family's everything," the president said quietly. "But loyalty to the club comes first, always has." Cal met his stare. "Never forgot that, Snake." "Make sure you don't." Snake released him and turned away, leaving Cal alone in the smoke-filled room. Through the window, Cal watched Mickey kick-start his bike. The enforcer would be following him now, watching his every move. The net was tightening. The clock on the church tower showed midnight when Cal parked his motorcycle a block away. He walked the rest of the distance, his boots scuffing against the sidewalk. The small church stood quiet and dark, except for a soft glow coming from inside. Someone had left the lights on in the sanctuary. Cal tested the heavy wooden door. It opened with a gentle creak. He hesitated at the threshold, feeling out of place in his leather cut and faded jeans. But the weight in his chest pushed him forward. The sanctuary was empty. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward the altar, which was lit by a few electric candles. Their artificial flames cast dancing shadows on the walls. A large cross hung above, its presence both welcoming and intimidating. Cal slid into the last pew, as far from the altar as possible. The wood creaked under his weight. He sat stiffly, unsure what to do with his hands. They felt rough and wrong in this peaceful place. "First time here?" Cal startled. An elderly man in plain clothes stood in the side aisle, a Bible tucked under his arm. The minister, Cal guessed, though he wore no collar. "Just needed somewhere quiet," Cal muttered. The minister nodded. "God's house is always open." He paused. "Even to those who think they don't belong here." Cal shifted uncomfortably. "I've done things. Haven't we all?" The minister's voice was gentle. He didn't move closer, giving Cal his space. "But mercy isn't earned. It's given freely." The word mercy hit Cal like a physical blow. How many times had he shown none? How many families had he torn apart in the name of club loyalty? What if... Cal's voice was barely a whisper. What if protecting someone means betraying everything you've built? Sounds like you already know the answer. The minister smiled sadly. Sometimes the hardest choice is the only right one. Cal stared at his hands. They were shaking slightly. These hands had hurt so many people. Could they now be used to protect? To save? There's a verse I think about often, the minister said quietly. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That's mercy, friend, given when we least deserve it. The words settled into Cal's chest like a warm weight. He thought of Lena, of Eli, of the grandchild growing in secret, of all the chances he'd missed to choose differently. I should go, Cal said roughly, standing up. The minister nodded. Come back any time. God's mercy is new every morning. Cal walked out into the cool night air. The word mercy echoed in his mind, offering a strange comfort. It felt like permission to choose a different path, even if that path led away from everything he'd known. His motorcycle waited in the shadows, but for once its promise of freedom felt hollow. Real freedom, he was beginning to understand, might look very different than he'd always thought. Lena walked through the church garden, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. The morning sun warmed her face as she followed the stone path between neat rows of flowers. She'd noticed the elderly woman tending these gardens before, during her secret visits to pray. Today, the woman was on her knees beside a patch of daisies, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and garden gloves. She looked up as Lena's shadow fell across the flowers. Good morning, dear. The woman's smile was kind, creating a web of wrinkles around her eyes. I'm Martha. I've seen you here before, haven't I? Lena nodded, suddenly nervous. I'm Lena. I come sometimes to think. Martha patted the stone bench beside her. Would you like to sit? These old knees need a rest anyway. Something in Martha's gentle manner made Lena's carefully built walls start to crumble. She sat down, smoothing her dress over her still flat stomach. The garden's beautiful, Lena said softly. Thank you, dear. I started it after my Harold passed. Martha removed her gardening gloves. Sometimes the best healing happens while your hands are in the dirt. Tears pricked at Lena's eyes. How did you deal with people judging you after he died? Martha studied her face. Small towns love their gossip, don't they? But judgment says more about them than us. She paused. You're carrying a heavy burden, aren't you? The kindness in Martha's voice broke something in Lena. Words spilled out before she could stop them. I'm pregnant, she whispered, and people, if they knew, they'd never understand. Martha's hand found Lena's, warm and weathered. Oh, my dear girl, do you know what I see when I look at you? Lena shook her head, wiping tears with her free hand. I see a young woman trying her best to protect new life. That's not something to be ashamed of. Martha squeezed her hand. The world is quick to condemn what it doesn't understand. But love? Real love? That's never wrong. But what if... Lena's voice cracked. What if protecting this baby means losing everything else? Then you'll find new everything. Martha's voice was firm but gentle. When I lost Harold, I thought my world had ended. But life has a way of giving us exactly what we need, even if it's not what we expected. They sat in comfortable silence, watching butterflies dance between the flowers. Martha didn't press for details Lena couldn't give. She just offered quiet company and understanding. Would you like to help me with these daisies? Martha finally asked. There's something healing about nurturing growing things. Lena found herself nodding. Martha handed her a spare pair of gloves, showing her how to carefully clear weeds from around the delicate flowers. "Every living thing needs protection while it grows," Martha said softly. "Whether it's a flower or a child, that's not weakness, it's wisdom." As they worked side by side in the garden, Lena felt the crushing weight of judgment and fear begin to lift. Martha's acceptance, offered without questions or conditions, wrapped around her like a warm blanket. When it was time to leave, Martha pressed a small bundle of daisies into Lena's hands. "Come back any time, dear. The garden's always here, and so am I." Lena walked home with the flowers clutched to her chest, her steps lighter than they'd been in weeks. The world hadn't changed. The dangers were still real, the future still uncertain. But Martha's compassion had given her something precious, the knowledge that she wasn't alone, and that love, in all its forms, was worth protecting. The safe house sat at the end of a dirt road, hidden behind tall pines that swayed in the evening breeze. Inside, warmth and the smell of home cooking filled the small kitchen. Cal watched as Lena stirred a pot of soup while Eli set 3 places at the wooden table. It felt strange, dangerous even, to be together like this. But there was also something right about it, something that made Cal's chest tight with emotion he couldn't name. "Just like Mom used to make," Eli said, breathing in the scent of vegetable soup. His voice was soft, careful, as if speaking too loudly might shatter this fragile moment. Lena ladled the soup into bowls, her movements gentle and precise. "I found her old recipe book last spring," she said. "It felt important to keep some things alive." Cal watched his children, both so grown now, both carrying such heavy burdens. And starting scene. Early the next day, Cal is urgently summoned to the clubhouse. Ending scene. The president orders Cal to bring in Eli, suspecting he's alive. Cal's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel of his parked truck, knuckles white under the dim glow of a distant streetlight. The safe house sat quiet before him, a simple 2-story building with peeling paint and drawn curtains. Inside, his children slept. Eli, Lena, and his unborn grandchild, his family. The word felt strange in his mind after so many years of putting the club first. The club president's words from earlier echoed in his head. "Bring him in, Cal. That's an order." The steel in those words had been unmistakable. They knew, or at least strongly suspected, that Eli was alive. Cal had seen it in their eyes at the clubhouse, the doubt, the growing suspicion. His decades of loyalty were being questioned, and rightly so. He loosened his grip on the wheel, his hands aching. The leather of his motorcycle vest creaked as he leaned back, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. All his life, he'd lived by the club's code. Loyalty above all else. Family meant brotherhood, meant the patch on your back, and the men who wore it. But now... Cal reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small ultrasound picture Lena had given him earlier that day. Even in the weak light, he could make out the tiny form, his grandchild. His chest tightened as he traced the image with one rough finger. This small life, not yet born, represented everything he'd failed to protect in his own children's lives. The night air felt heavy in his lungs as he remembered all the times he'd chosen the club over his family. Birthdays missed, school events ignored. The way Eli's eyes had hardened over the years, watching his father's violence. The fear in Lena's face when he'd arranged her marriage to secure a club alliance. He'd told himself it was all necessary, all part of the life they'd chosen. But they hadn't chosen it. He had. Inside the safe house, a light flickered on briefly in an upstairs window. Cal watched the shadow of someone, probably Eli, move past the curtain. His son, who should be dead according to the club, but who had found the courage to break free of the cycle of violence, who had risked everything to protect his sister, to protect love instead of power. Cal's hands began to shake. The choice before him felt impossible. Betray the club that had been his life for over 30 years, or betray his own blood. Either way, blood would likely be spilled. The club didn't forgive betrayal. They wouldn't understand love that broke their code. He closed his eyes, the weight of decision pressing down on him like a physical thing. For the first time since he was a small boy, Cal felt truly lost. The familiar answers of violence and control offered no solution here. His strength, his reputation, his feared status in the club, none of it could protect what mattered most. Without quite knowing why, Cal found his hands clasping together. His head bowed over the steering wheel as words he hadn't spoken in decades came haltingly to his lips. God! His voice cracked, barely a whisper in the dark truck cabin. I don't know if you're listening. I ain't exactly been on speaking terms with you. He swallowed hard. But I need to know what's right here. These are my kids, my grandkid. Show me how to protect them. Please. The word please hung in the air, foreign and vulnerable from a man who had demanded and taken all his life. Cal stayed there, head bowed, hands clasped, as quiet tears marked unfamiliar trails down his weathered cheeks. The sun hadn't quite crested the horizon when Cal knocked on the safe house door. His knuckles rapped against the worn wood with practiced restraint. 3 short taps, followed by 2 longer ones, their agreed-upon signal. The porch boards creaked beneath his heavy boots as he waited, every sense alert for any sign of being followed. Eli opened the door, his eyes already showing understanding of why his father had come so early. He'd always been able to read Cal's face, even when Cal thought he was hiding his emotions well. The young man stepped back, letting his father enter the dim living room where a single lamp cast long shadows. They know, don't they? Eli's voice was steady, though his hands fidgeted with the hem of his worn work shirt. He looked different from the son Cal remembered, harder in some ways, softer in others. The mechanic's life had left grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, but there was a peace in his bearing that had never been there before. Cal sank into an old armchair, the springs protesting under his weight. They suspect. The president called me in yesterday. He rubbed his face, the stubble rough against his palms. Ordered me to bring you in. Eli's jaw tightened, but he didn't show fear. Instead, he glanced towards the stairs leading to where Lena slept. How much time do we have? Not much. A day, maybe 2 before they start looking harder. Cal leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. They're watching me now, testing my loyalty. The room fell silent except for the tick of an old clock on the wall. Through the window, the sky was beginning to turn from black to deep blue, the stars fading one by one. Eli paced the worn carpet, his movements controlled but tense. I won't run, Eli said finally, stopping to face his father. Not if it means leaving Lena behind, not with the baby coming. Cal nodded, having expected this answer. It was the same stubborn loyalty he'd always shown, just directed at something worth protecting now. I'm not asking you to run. Not alone, anyway. Eli's eyebrows rose slightly. What are you saying? I'm saying... Cal stood up, his full height making the room feel smaller. I'm saying that I'll handle this, whatever it takes. He stepped closer to his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. You focus on Lena and that baby. Let me worry about the club. Dad. Eli's voice caught, showing a glimpse of the boy he'd once been. They'll kill you if they find out you helped us. Cal's grip tightened on Eli's shoulder. Then they won't find out. His voice carried the same authority it always had, but now it was tempered with something else. Love, maybe, or wisdom. I've spent 30 years building power in that club. Time to use it for something that matters. The first rays of sunlight began to slip through the window blinds, painting stripes across the carpet between father and son. Eli searched his father's face, looking for any sign of doubt or deception. He found none. "I need you to trust me," Cal said softly. "Can you do that, after everything?" Eli nodded slowly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yeah, Dad, I can do that." Cal pulled his son into a rough embrace, holding him tight for a moment before stepping back. "I'll handle everything, whatever it costs." The promise hung in the morning air between them, as solid as steel and just as unbreakable. Cal sat in his truck outside the post office, watching the afternoon crowd thin out. His leather vest felt heavy on his shoulders, the patches that had once filled him with pride now weighing him down like armor he no longer wanted to wear. The manila envelope on the passenger seat contained what he hoped would be enough to save his children. Inside were carefully forged documents, passport copies, fake flight records, and receipts from hotels in Mexico City. Cal had called in old favors, paying heavily for paper trails that would convince the club Eli had fled south. The work had to be perfect. One mistake, one detail out of place, and everything would fall apart. He pulled into the clubhouse parking lot 20 minutes later, gravel crunching under his tires. Two prospects lounged near the entrance, straightening up when they recognized his truck. Cal grabbed the envelope and stepped out, his boots hitting the ground with practiced authority. The club president, Marcus Steele Jensen, was waiting in the office, a cloud of cigarette smoke hanging around him like a storm about to break. Cal had known the man for 20 years, had watched him rise to power through cunning and calculated violence. Now those sharp eyes turned on him, searching for any sign of weakness. "Tell me you found something," Steele said, tapping ash into a dirty glass tray. Cal tossed the envelope onto the desk. "Better than that, I found proof." Steele opened the envelope, spreading the contents across his desk. Cal stood silent, watching as the other man examined each document. The sound of paper shuffling filled the small office, mixing with the distant rumble of motorcycles outside. "Mexican passport control stamps," Steele muttered, holding one page up to the light. "Hotel receipts from Mexico City, all dated 3 days ago." He looked up at Cal. "How'd you get these?" "Called in favors from our brothers down south," Cal said, the lie smooth on his tongue. "They confirmed he crossed at Tijuana. Been staying in cheap hotels, moving fast." He leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk. "He's running scared, Steele. Thinks we're coming for him." Steele studied the documents again, his expression hardening. The little bastard really did it, faked his own death and ran. He slammed his fist on the desk, making the ashtray jump. "Should have known when we couldn't find a body after that crash." Cal straightened up, keeping his face neutral. "Want me to send someone after him?" Steele was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers. Finally, he shook his head. "No. Let him rot down there, looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life." He gathered the documents and shoved them back in the envelope. "Besides, Mexico's not our territory. Could cause problems with our southern chapters if we start hunting there." Relief flooded through Cal, though he kept it hidden behind years of practiced control. "Your call, boss." "Yeah," Steele growled, lighting another cigarette. "Get out of here. And Cal?" He waited until Cal turned back. "Good work finding this. Proves your loyalty." Cal nodded once and stepped out of the office. He walked through the clubhouse, past members playing pool and drinking beer, their conversations dying down as he passed. They'd all hear about Eli's escape soon enough. The story would spread through the club like wildfire, becoming another cautionary tale about betrayal and consequences. Outside, Cal paused to light his own cigarette, his hand steady despite everything. Around him, the afternoon sun beat down on rows of parked motorcycles, their chrome gleaming like promises of freedom. But for the first time in decades, Cal felt truly free standing still. The club had bought the lie. His children were safe. The sunset painted the clubhouse in deep shadows as Cal pulled into the parking lot one last time. His motorcycle's engine ticked as it cooled, a sound that had been the heartbeat of his life for over 30 years. Tonight, that heartbeat would stop. He found Steele in his usual spot behind the desk, papers spread out in front of him like battle plans. The office smelled of stale smoke and leather, familiar scents that Cal had breathed in most of his adult life. "Need to talk to you," Cal said, closing the door behind him. Steele looked up, his weathered face creased with suspicion. "About what?" Cal moved to stand in front of the desk, his hands steady at his sides. "I'm stepping down, tonight." The words landed like stones in still water. Steele leaned back in his chair, studying Cal with narrowed eyes. The silence stretched between them, heavy with decades of shared history and spilled blood. "This about Eli?" Steele finally asked. "It's about me," Cal replied, his voice firm. "I've given everything to this club. My youth, my marriage, most of my life with my kids." He took a deep breath. "I'm tired, Steele. Bone tired." Steele's chair creaked as he stood up. "You're one of our strongest. The brothers respect you. Fear you. Maybe that's part of the problem." Cal reached into his cut and pulled out his patches. The leather was worn smooth from years of wear, the threads holding the patches frayed but stubborn. "I don't want to be feared anymore." He placed the patches on the desk. The club's colors seemed to glare up at him, demanding loyalty, threatening consequences. But for the first time in his life, Cal felt stronger without them. Steele picked up the patches, turning them over in his hands. "You know how this works, Cal. Nobody just walks away." "I'm not walking away," Cal said. "I'm retiring, with honor, unless you want to make this something else." The threat hung in the air between them. Steele might be president, but Cal's reputation had been built on more than just loyalty. They both knew what would happen if Steele pushed this into violence. After a long moment, Steele nodded slowly. "The club owes you that much." He set the patches down. "But once you're out, you're out. No coming back." "I understand." Cal turned toward the door, then paused. "You were a good president, Steele. Better than most. And you were the best enforcer I ever had." Steele's voice was gruff. "Go on. Get out of here before I change my mind." Cal walked through the clubhouse one final time. A few members were gathered around the pool table, others lounging on the worn couches. They fell silent as he passed, sensing something had changed. None of them tried to stop him. Outside, the night air was cool on his face. His back felt lighter without the weight of his patches, though the memories they carried would never fully fade. Cal swung his leg over his bike, the familiar motion now carrying him toward something new instead of binding him to the past. The engine roared to life, echoing off the clubhouse walls. Cal looked up at the building one last time, remembering the young man who had first walked through those doors seeking brotherhood and purpose. That man was gone now, replaced by someone who had finally found a different kind of strength. Without looking back, Cal rolled the throttle and rode into the darkness, leaving behind the only life he had known for the promise of something better. The sound of his motorcycle faded into the night, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the air as Cal pulled his truck onto the empty highway. In the back seat, Lena dozed against Eli's shoulder, her hand resting protectively over her belly. The steady hum of tires on asphalt filled the cab, a rhythmic sound that helped mask their nervousness. Cal checked the rearview mirror for the 100th time. No bikes, no suspicious vehicles, just empty road stretching behind them. He'd chosen the route carefully, avoiding major highways and club territories. The less attention they drew, the better. "You've got everything memorized?" Cal asked, glancing at Eli in the mirror. Eli nodded, his arm tightening around Lena. "New names, new background stories. The contact in Oregon is expecting us next week." He paused, studying the documents in his lap. "These look real, Dad. Really real." "They should. Cost enough." Cal managed a small smile. "Your new mechanic's license is registered and everything. Should be able to find work easy." Lena stirred, blinking sleepily. "How much longer?" "Another hour to the meeting point," Cal replied. "Try to rest while you can, sweetheart." They drove on in comfortable silence, watching the landscape change from familiar territory to something new and unknown. Cal's hands were steady on the wheel, but his heart ached with each mile that took them further from home. This was right. This was necessary, but it didn't make it any easier. The sun climbed higher as they turned onto smaller roads, following a careful path that would leave no trace for anyone to follow. Cal had spent weeks planning this route, making sure it avoided any club connections or familiar faces. Finally, they pulled into a quiet roadside rest stop, tucked away in a grove of pine trees. No other cars were around, just like Cal had planned. He parked in a spot that gave them a clear view of both approaches. "This is it," he said softly, turning off the engine. They sat for a moment, letting the reality sink in. This would be goodbye, at least for now, until things were safer, until the baby was born, until so many things that none of them could control. Cal got out first, checking the area one last time. Eli helped Lena from the back seat, supporting her carefully. She looked pale but determined, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "There's extra cash in the blue bag," Cal said, his voice rougher than usual. "Emergency numbers are written in that Bible I gave you, coded like we discussed." Eli nodded, trying to smile. "We'll be careful, Dad. I promise." "You better be." Cal reached out and pulled his son into a tight hug. "You're going to be a good father, Eli, better than I was." "You're a good father, too," Eli whispered. "You're saving us right now." Cal held him for another moment before letting go. Then he turned to Lena, who fell into his arms with a soft sob. "Daddy," she breathed, clinging to him like she used to when she was small. "I love you, baby girl." Cal pressed a kiss to her hair. "Both of you. All three of you." He placed his hand gently on her stomach, feeling the promise of new life beneath. "We'll find a way to let you know when the baby comes," Lena promised, wiping her eyes. "Just stay safe, that's all I need to know." Cal stepped back, forcing himself to be strong for them one last time. "Go on now. You've got a long drive ahead." The morning fog rolled thick through the streets of their new Oregon town, wrapping around the small rental house Lena and Eli now called home. Through the kitchen window, Lena watched fallen leaves dance across their tiny front yard, while she sipped her chamomile tea. 6 weeks had passed since they'd said goodbye to her father at that quiet rest stop, and each day brought a mixture of gratitude and heartache. Their house wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, faded siding, and creaky floors, but it felt safe. The neighbors kept to themselves, and the town was small enough that newcomers weren't unusual, but not so tiny that they drew attention. Eli had found work at a local garage, where his skilled hands and quiet manner earned him quick respect. "Morning," Eli said softly, coming up behind her. His hands settled gently on her growing belly, which was now showing clearly at 5 months. How are my girls doing?" Lena leaned back against him, smiling. "We're good, though your daughter was doing somersaults all night." "Already keeping you up, huh?" He kissed her temple. Just like her mama, full of energy. The simple domesticity of their mornings still felt surreal sometimes. No more looking over their shoulders, no more stolen moments. Here, they could just be a young couple expecting their first child. Their new identities, Mark and Sarah Cooper, were becoming more natural with each passing day. Lena moved to their small kitchen table, where she'd set out paper and pen. "I think it's time to write to Dad," she said, running her hand over the blank page. "The doctor says everything's perfect with the baby. He should know that." Eli nodded, setting a plate of toast beside her. "Use the post office box we set up. Remember the code words we agreed on?" "Of course." Lena picked up the pen, her heart full of words she wanted to share. They'd been so careful about communication, using the secure channels Cal had arranged. Each message had to be crafted carefully, looking innocent to anyone else's eyes. The morning light grew stronger as Lena wrote, choosing her words with care. She told him about their little house, about how the town reminded her of old movies with its main street and friendly diners. She described how Eli had already become the garage's most requested mechanic, his natural talent shining through even under a new name. Most importantly, she shared the joy of her latest doctor's appointment, how strong the baby's heartbeat was, how perfectly she was growing. She knew it would mean everything to Cal to hear that his granddaughter was healthy and protected. "I miss him so much," Lena whispered, wiping away a tear that had fallen onto the paper. "I wish he could be here." Eli squeezed her shoulder gently. "He is, in his own way. Everything we have here, this chance at a normal life, it's because of him." Lena nodded, returning to her letter. She wrote about the small garden she'd started in the backyard, knowing it would make her father smile to picture her planting flowers and vegetables. She told him about the kind elderly neighbor who brought over homemade bread, and how the local church reminded her of the one where he'd found his own piece of peace. As she signed the letter with her new name, Lena added a postscript in their special code, a way of saying, "I love you," that only Cal would understand. She sealed the envelope carefully, knowing these words would have to carry all the hugs and conversations they couldn't share in person. The small church bell chimed 9 times as Cal walked up the worn stone steps. Sunday mornings had become his anchor in a life that felt strangely weightless without the constant pull of club business. He nodded to familiar faces as he made his way to his usual spot in the back pew, where the morning light filtered through stained glass cast soft colors across his weathered hands. 3 months had passed since he'd walked away from the Hells Angels. The silence in his life sometimes felt deafening. No more rumbling motorcycles, no late-night calls for emergency meetings, no constant tension of maintaining power and control. His house, once a hub of club activity, stood quiet now. The garage where brothers had gathered to plan runs and settle scores held only his own bike, recently repainted a modest dark blue. "Good morning, Cal," Pastor Mike said warmly, stopping by his pew before the service. The older man had never pushed or pried, simply offered quiet acceptance as Cal became a regular presence in his congregation. "Morning, Pastor," Cal replied, managing a small smile. He'd grown comfortable here, finding unexpected peace in the familiar rhythms of worship and prayer. As the congregation sang the opening hymn, Cal's mind drifted to Lena and Eli. The ache of missing them had become a constant companion, but it was a clean pain, nothing like the twisted guilt and fear that had haunted him during his years with the club. He touched the small Bible in his jacket pocket, a gift from the pastor that now contained the only photo he had of his children from their last morning together. After the service, Cal drove home in his pickup truck, the vehicle that had replaced his Harley for most daily tasks. The neighbors had slowly stopped staring when the notorious biker began living like any other retiree, tending his yard and reading on the front porch. Some even waved now, especially Mrs. Henderson next door, who'd started leaving plates of cookies since noticing he lived alone. Inside his kitchen, Cal put on a pot of coffee and sorted through the mail that had accumulated over the past few days. Bills, advertisements, a church newsletter. And then his heart stopped. There, in careful handwriting he would know anywhere, was a letter with the return address they'd arranged. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope, something that would have been unthinkable during his years as the iron-fisted club patriarch. The pages inside smelled faintly of the lavender lotion Lena had always loved, and Cal had to blink hard before he could focus on the words. He read slowly, savoring each detail of their new life. The little house, Eli's success at the garage, Lena's garden. Pride and relief washed over him as he learned about his granddaughter's strong heartbeat and perfect growth. The doctor's confirmation of her health felt like a benediction, a sign that the sacrifices had been worth it. When he reached the coded postscript, Cal pressed his fingers to the words, touching the hidden "I love you," as if he could feel Lena's presence through the paper. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in his Bible alongside the photo. These precious connections to the family he'd chosen over everything he'd once thought defined him. The morning sun streamed through his kitchen window as Cal sat with his cooling coffee, the letter's news settling into his heart. His granddaughter was healthy. His children were safe. And here in his quiet house, far from the chaos and violence of his past, he was finally at peace. Cal's hands shook as he carefully opened the letter again, and something small slipped out. A photograph fluttered to his kitchen table, landing face down on the worn wood. His heart pounded as he reached for it, remembering all the secret hopes he'd carried these past months. Turning it over slowly, he caught his breath. There, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, lay his grandson, tiny features peaceful in sleep, one small fist curled near his chin. The image was slightly blurred, as if taken in a hurry, but Cal could see everything that mattered. The baby had Lena's nose, and what looked like Eli's strong chin. A shock of dark hair peeked out from under a knitted cap. Written on the back in Lena's careful handwriting were the details he'd been waiting for. Caleb Michael, 7 pounds 4 ounces, born at sunrise. The date showed he was just 5 days old. Cal traced the name with weathered fingers, understanding the gift they'd given him by choosing it. Caleb, his own name carried forward, a bridge between the past he'd left behind and this new future he'd helped create. The morning light streamed through his kitchen window, warming the photograph as Cal studied every detail. The baby's tiny fingers, the hospital bracelet still visible on his wrist, the peaceful curve of his mouth that somehow reminded Cal of Lena when she was small. He could almost imagine the weight of this new life in his arms, though he knew it might be months or even years before he could safely meet his grandson in person. Memories washed over him, holding Lena for the first time, watching Eli take his first steps, all the precious moments of their childhood before the club had started pulling him away. But this time was different. This time, he'd chosen family over power, love over violence. This tiny boy would grow up free from the shadow that had darkened his own children's lives. Cal's vision blurred as he noticed something else in the photo. A small silver cross necklace draped carefully across the edge of Caleb's blanket. It was the one he'd given Lena the day he'd helped them escape, a piece of his new faith to carry with them. She'd placed it there deliberately, showing him that they were keeping their promises, raising this child in the light of hope rather than the darkness of their past. Standing slowly, Cal walked to the living room where sunlight painted patterns on the wall through lace curtains Mrs. Henderson had insisted on hanging. "Your house needs a woman's touch," she'd said, and he hadn't had the heart to refuse her kindness. Now, those same curtains cast gentle shadows over the photograph as he sank into his favorite chair. Everything he'd given up, the power, the respect, the brotherhood he'd known for decades, seemed insignificant compared to this moment. This was what redemption looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic sacrifices, but a tiny baby named Caleb, sleeping peacefully in a photograph he would treasure forever. Cal pressed the photo to his chest, feeling truly at peace for the first time in longer than he could remember. The weight of his past, the violence and fear that had defined so much of his life, seemed to lift away. In its place settled something lighter, sweeter. The simple joy of being a grandfather, of knowing his family was safe, of choosing love over everything else.